Biology 1014, The Essential Body. The textbook for this course is The Human Body in Health and Illness, Herlihy's Edition 6. Each video lecture will direct you to pay attention to the learning outcomes or learning objectives listed in that chapter. Using these as a guide will help you to create helpful study notes for yourself, which will make up a valuable study package for test and exam preps. All test and exam questions will line up with these learning objectives. No surprises here. Chapter 1 provides an introduction to the human body. In this chapter, we're introduced to some of the basic language and universally accepted conventions used to describe and discuss the human body in medical or anatomical terms. Having a sound knowledge of the concepts and related medical terminology will allow you to communicate clearly and concisely. You can easily imagine how important this is, not just in your academic program, but in your career as well. Becoming fluent in the language of anatomy and physiology will allow you to present yourself as professional and knowledgeable in any healthcare field. Turning now to a quick overview of Chapter 1, we will be looking at anatomy and physiology, levels of organization, homeostasis, anatomical terms, a brief introduction to medical terminology, and major body cavities, regions, and quadrants. The terms introduced to kick off this chapter are anatomy and physiology. Anatomy deals with the structure or the morphology of the body and its parts, in other words, the names of the parts. Physiology studies the functions of these parts and asks the questions, how do they work? As we work through the concepts covered in this term, you will come to appreciate the phrase, function follows form. This phrase explains the relationship between anatomy and physiology. The function that any given part performs depends entirely on how it is constructed. So, function follows form. And this is true at all levels of organization of the human body, starting with individual cells. The human body is the sum of its parts, and these parts can be studied at different levels of organization. Starting at the simplest level and working our way up, we have the atoms. Two or more atoms together comprise a molecule. Macromolecules are a collection of different types of molecules. These are large, biologically important molecules found inside cells. Organelles are aggregates or collections of macromolecules used to carry out a specific function in a particular cell. Cells are the basic units of structure and function of all living things. Tissues are groups of cells functioning together. Groups of tissues then form organs that have specialized functions. Groups of organs function together as organ systems. Organ systems functioning together make up an organism, a human in this case. Throughout the course, we will look at the 12 major organ systems that make up the human body. The integumentary system consists of the skin and related structures. It forms a covering for the body, helps regulate body temperature, and contains some of the structures required for sensation. The skeletal system forms the basic framework for the body and protects and supports body organs. The muscular system moves the skeleton and helps maintain body posture. There are 3 types of muscle tissue: skeletal, smooth, and cardiac. The lymphatic system helps defend the body against pathogens and other foreign material. It also plays an important role in fluid balance. The immune system, not shown here, works with the lymphatic system to protect the body from pathogens, foreign substances, allergens, and even our own body cells when needed, for example, cancer. The digestive system breaks down the food we eat into substances that can be absorbed by the body. It also eliminates the waste products formed during this process. The respiratory system brings oxygen-rich air into the lungs and removes carbon dioxide-rich air from the lungs. The nervous system is made up of the brain, spinal cord, nerves, and sense organs. Sensory nerves transmit information to the spinal cord and the brain. The brain and the spinal cord then make and transmit decisions back to the body. The circulatory system pumps and transports blood through the body, carrying nutrients and oxygen to cells and carrying waste away from cells. The endocrine system secretes hormones that regulate body activities such as growth, reproduction, metabolism, and water balance. The urinary system excretes waste products from the body through the urine. It also helps control the amount of water and other substances in the body. And finally, the reproductive system, which helps enables to reproduce and make more humans. Homeostasis is the word used to describe the maintenance of a balanced and stable internal environment within the body. The word homeostasis itself derives from two Greek words, homeo, which means similar, and stasis, which means stable. A more formal definition of homeostasis is a characteristic of a system that regulates its internal environment and tends to maintain a stable, constant condition of properties. This regulation is carried out through control systems or homeostatic mechanisms in the body. Each individual uses homeostatic mechanisms to keep body levels within a normal range. Normal ranges can vary from one individual to another. Every day, we eat, sweat, drink, maybe dance if you're lucky, eat some more, including salty fries sometimes, and yet our amazing bodies maintain that critical internal balance, and most of the time we don't even have to think about it. That amazes me every day. A few examples of variables that are regulated constantly include the salt concentration in blood, glucose concentration in blood, our body temperature, and the amount of blood in our bodies. Sometimes, though, our homeostatic mechanisms don't work correctly. This can lead to a homeostatic imbalance. Homeostatic imbalance can result in illness or disease. Some diseases have external causes, like a toxin or a pathogen invading the body. Flu bug, for example. Some diseases have internal causes. Type 1 diabetes is one disease that severely affects homeostasis. In such circumstances, medical intervention is required to maintain homeostasis. Anatomical position is a convention used around the world so that everyone is working from the same reference point when describing body parts for medical or scientific purposes. This convention is also used by police and pathologists to describe injuries to the human body on official charts and records. Anatomical position is, as you see pictured here, body erect, feet and face facing forward, upper arms at the side with the palms facing forward so that the little finger is closest to the body. Adopting this standard convention allows us to describe the position of all body parts in relationship to this position. Such positions are called relative positions. Let's look at some of the terms used to describe these relative positions. Now, this model is standing in the anatomical position, as you can see. Follow the relative positions shown here and note that they occur in pairs of opposites. Superior refers to a part that is above another part. Inferior, a part that is below another part. Anterior, also sometimes called ventral, refers to a part towards the front. Posterior, also sometimes called dorsal, refers towards the back. The midline divides the body into left and right sides. The term medial refers to something that is closer to the midline, whereas lateral refers to something leaning away from the midline towards the side. Another term that employs the word lateral is bilateral. Bilateral means two. This term just refers to paired structures with one on each side. A proximal relative position is closer to the point of attachment or to another referenced body part, whereas distal refers to one further away from the point of attachment or another referenced body part. Not shown here is the term superficial, which refers to something near to the surface. Deep refers to something more internal, further away from the surface and closer to the inside core of the body. There are three main planes of the body. A sagittal plane divides the body into left and right portions along an invisible line. If this line passes along the midline, we call it the median or mid-sagittal section. If the dividing line, however, is lateral or off to the side of the midline, it is called parasagittal. A transverse or horizontal plane divides the body into top and bottom, or superior and inferior portions. Finally, the frontal or coronal plane divides the body into front and back sections, or anterior and posterior sections. Looking now at regional terms, we see that the body can also be described in terms of specific regions. For example, the cranial region includes the cephalic, orbital, oral, buccal, and cervical areas. At the front and at the back, we see the occipital region. The rest of the regions are also shown here. These regions are covered well in your textbook. You're responsible for learning them and for being able to describe them in terms of their relative positions to one another. For example, the sternal region is inferior to the cephalic region. You should be prepared to be able to identify these regions and the descriptions of each. For example, the orbital region refers to the area around the eye. You have to think, now, wouldn't these make great test or exam questions? Hint, hint. Using the medical terminology table in each chapter will greatly assist you with learning these new terms by breaking the words down into their parts and explaining the meaning of these parts. Indeed, learning the rules and patterns of medical terminology is likely the most beneficial thing that you can do for yourself in your study of anatomy and physiology, because once you recognize the component parts of any anatomical or medical word, you won't have to memorize anything, because the word will simply describe itself. This is definitely the key to fluency in the field. Now, a medical word consists of some or all of the following elements: a root word, a combining form, a suffix, or a prefix. The root word is the main part or foundation of a word. These word roots are generally derived from Greek or Latin words. All medical words have at least one word root. The combining form is created when a word root is combined with a vowel, usually an O. It has no meaning on its own, but enables two words elements to be linked together. The suffix is the word element located at the end of the word. It usually indicates a procedure, a condition, or a disease. The prefix is the word element located at the beginning of a word. It usually indicates a number, a time, a position, or a negation. A negation is something that means without or an absence of. So watch for these rules and the patterns in medical terminology sections of each chapter, and use these terms every chance you get. You're actually learning a new language, and practice makes perfect. Before you know it, it'll be second nature to you. You will be responsible for learning the medical terminology for each chapter and body system. Please don't expect that just reading these terms will allow you to actually own them. Many students end up in difficulty just because they mistake recognizing a word with actually understanding it well enough to use it or to come up with it on their own. You will need to spend time on these every week, regularly, without fail. Write them out, because writing your notes and your terms by hand creates a stronger neural connection to the concepts. This will serve you well in the future. Also, accurate spelling is essential in medicine, so correct all misspelled words immediately. Then repeat, 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 and use the correct medical terms and language whenever you discuss anatomy and physiology with your colleagues. The body cavities house the organs of the body. These organs are collectively called the viscera. The two main cavities are the dorsal and the ventral cavities. Dorsally, we find the cranial cavity, which houses the brain, and the spinal or vertebral cavity. Looking ventrally, we find two further subdivisions that are separated by the diaphragm: the thoracic cavity and the abdominal pelvic cavity. The thoracic cavity includes the mediastinum and the pleural cavities, and the abdominal pelvic cavity, as the word suggests, includes both the abdominal cavity and the pelvic cavity. The abdominal pelvic cavity can also be described in terms of 9 regions or 4 quadrants. Let's look at the 9 regions first. Use the directional words left and right and any patterns you can find in these 9 regions to help you create a mind map of where they are and what they're called. Note carefully the images that you see are mirror images. They're facing opposite to you, so your right will not line up with the right on the diagram. Find a pattern then that helps you to recognize the names and locations of these 9 regions. The epigastric region, flanked by the right and left hypochondriac region. Under the epigastric, we find the umbilical region right in the area of the umbilicus or the belly button, and left and right to that, we find the left and right lateral regions. Inferior to the umbilical region, we find the pubic region. On either side of that, we find the left and right inguinal region. The abdominal area can also be divided into 4 quadrants, quad meaning 4. So there are an upper and lower quadrant and a right and left of each of those. So we have the upper right quadrant, often referred to as a short form RUQ. The left upper quadrant, LUQ, right lower quadrant, RLQ, and finally left lower quadrant, LLQ. Now here's an example of the use of this medical terminology in practice. Examining the quadrant picture carefully, you may actually be able to locate a small organ protruding from the large bowel. This is the appendix. The location of the appendix is medically described as being in the lower right quadrant. Well, that's it, and we're going to recap now that in Chapter 1 we've looked at anatomy and physiology, levels of organization, homeostasis, anatomical terms, a brief introduction to medical terminology, and finally major body cavities, regions, and quadrants. There are a few slides here to allow you to test yourself or someone else, and I do hope that you take advantage of these. It'll highlight for you where you need to spend a little more time and where you actually got a handle on this. And that's the end of Chapter 1.